Ladies and gentlemen, I'm truly honored and privileged to be here this afternoon and to participate in your 14th annual conference. When I was asked to participate, my first question, what do you want me to talk about to the organizers? And they said, pretty anything you want. Then what's the title of your conference? And they said, Opportunities in Adversity. And that's a very curious title. The first thing that came to my mind is the story of those two salesmen. The story goes as follows. A shoe company decided to expand its sales into this remote island in the middle of nowhere. So they've sent two shoe salesmen, one with a degree in anthropology and the other with an MBA degree. After 1 week studying the market, studying the potential of this island, the guy with the anthropology degree wrote back to the headquarters. They say, it says the cable, people over here are quite backward. They walk barefoot. Let's not waste money and time in this market. At the same time, the MBA guy sent back a cable saying, people over here are backward. They walk barefoot. There is a hell of a market for shoes. That pretty much tells, in a nutshell, how can you find an opportunity in an adversity. And as we meet today, the world is experiencing a tremendous instability and uncertainty. The nature of the challenges and threats ahead of us are most complex we have ever faced. They range from a major global economic crisis and dislocations, global warming and climate change, epidemic and pandemics, demographic ticking time bombs, poor governance and corruption, transnational threats and terrorism, and finally geopolitical upheavals and the meltdown of a national political order in a number of important Arab countries. Since the 70s, the Arab region has stagnated in several areas. While Arab countries have increased their Human Development Index by 66% in the past 40 years, with significant improvements in literacy rates, healthcare, and overall standard of living, they remained lacking in the area of political and economic development. The population of the Arab world, or the Arab countries, have practically tripled since 1970. But rapid urbanization, inefficient investment, and a failure to confront surging of unemployment have contributed to near negative economic growth rates. Since 1970, conflicts, wars, displacement of people within the Arab states have created a hostile business environment, to say the least. This, coupled with outdated educational system, has forced the region to address the consequences of their resistance to reform. So before I dwell into the causes of these problems, let's ask, who are the Arab youth of today? One cannot comprehend the Arab youth quake of 2011 without looking at some of the obstacles and challenges that faced our young generation, future generation, and the factors that led up to this quake. The Arab youth of today make up 65% of the Arab population, with over 30% of the population between the ages of 15 and 29, representing over 100 million youth. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the highest proportion of youth to adults in the region's history. The interests, values, and ideas of this generation of Arabs may vary from one country to the next, but they do share a common purpose to affect their political future. They also share a newfound awareness of the power of networking. The majority of this youth demographic lives in an urban setting with access to a variety of multimedia and social network sites. They are technologically aware and have become increasingly more active in their demands for political and economic opportunities. It has long been recognized in the press. It has long been recognized that the press is the fourth branch of government. In today's world, I think technology is the fifth branch of government. It has given individuals and communities a medium to interact, exchange ideas, and to hold officials accountable. It has empowered this generation through social media, websites, blogs, Twitters, Facebooks. To put things into perspectives, allow me to go over some of few statistics. 75% of the internet users in the Arab world are between the ages of 15 and 29. And the number of internet users in our region is estimated to exceed 44% of total Arab population. In fact, it is projected that by 2020, the Arab world will exceed the global average internet connectivity. As evident, our youth are increasingly becoming more involved in this fifth branch of government, and with good reason. Censorship of the press and the stifling of free speech and expression has driven the Arab youth away from traditional media of print, television, and radio, and into the non-restrictive world of internet, where they could openly communicate their frustration with the status quo. These frustrations have recently culminated in popular uprisings witnessed in Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Yemen, Iraq, and Syria, among others, where the youth come out to challenge the bleak socioeconomic futures they foresaw for their generation. Therefore, the challenges that face this coming generation of Arab youth can be summarized by three main deficits: the employment deficit, the knowledge deficit, and the democracy deficit. With respect to the employment deficit, this first obstacle to youth empowerment and self-sufficiency is the disturbing rate of unemployment. The salient facts of this phenomena, according to the World Bank, are as follows. 54% of the MENA region's working age population is unemployed or inactive. 3 out of 4 working age women do not participate in the labor force, which constitute 80 to 90% of the inactive population. 1 out of every 4 of the 15-24 age is unemployed. This is the highest unemployment youth rate in the world. In most regions of the world, the duration of unemployment is shorter for the youth than for the adults, reflecting the natural tendency of youth to move frequently between jobs. However, in most of MENA countries, youth unemployment tend to last longer, especially among higher educated youth. It's worth noting that the duration of the unemployment, rather than its occurrence, that is most detrimental to the human capital accumulation. The rapid growth in labor force, 2.7% per annum, implies the need to create close to 100 million new jobs by the year 2020, doubling the current level of employment. These figures are a testimony of the failure of the Arab government's policies on multiple fronts. In recent IMF study, numerous policy failures were observed in a number of Arab countries. First, failure to control the demographic dynamics. Over the past half a century, the big drop in the infant mortality rate combined with the high fertility rate resulted in a substantial increase in population growth. The MENA regions recorded over the past decade the fastest growth labor force in the world, save Africa. Second, failure to calibrate and improve the educational system to meet the market requirements for the appropriate technical and managerial skilled. Third, failure to reduce the labor market rigidities. According to the Global Competitiveness Report of 2011-2012, the MENA hiring and firing regulations are more restrictive than those in the emerging and developing countries. And finally, failure to reform the public sector. The MENA region has the highest government wage bill in the world, 9.8% of GDP, compared with the global average of 5.4%. Furthermore, public sector wages in MENA were on average 30% higher than those in the private sector, while in the rest of the world, it's 20% lower than the wages in the private sector. At this rate, the public sector obviously cannot possibly absorb the influx of youth workers. The private sector must be encouraged to create new jobs, to diversify, and to innovate. But without the tangible incentives to do so by their governments, companies cannot be expected to provide this employment for the masses. Governments need to encourage entrepreneurship, recognize the need for more privatization, and remove the many bureaucratic obstacles already in place. The great Ibn Khaldun spoke of labor as, and I quote, the source of value necessary for all earnings and value accumulation. What we have now is a labor he spoke of, and if coupled with a desire to shift to private sector employment, then we shall be able to attain the prosperity we strive for as nations. The status quo is unattainable for our children, and this is where I urge the business leaders in this audience to rise to the challenge and give our talented youth the opportunity they deserve. I guarantee you won't regret it. Equally important, numerous studies have shown that an increase in efficiency and equitable distribution of income are not necessarily a zero-sum game. Governments must design a smart privatization strategy that treat equity and efficiency as complementary rather than competing outcomes. Now I come to the knowledge deficit, the second deficit. With the emergence of highly aware and informed youth comes the essential demand for an equally challenging and inspiring educational system. The modernization and reform of our region's inadequate educational institutions is critical to our developmental plans. Our current schools are not producing the caliber of competent workers needed to compete in today's global market. So before being able to successfully modernize our nations, we need to seriously tackle the knowledge deficit to which the United Nations Arab Human Development Report referred. And without the enhancement of our learning establishments and the investment in new innovations in teaching technologies, we cannot support the growing demand of a new business for a skilled and capable workforce. Now I come to the last deficit, and that's the democracy deficit. Young Arabs have legitimate political concerns that must be addressed. As I mentioned before, young Arabs today are involved in their world through the many forms of social media available to them. They are aware of the power of the media and the influence of popular opinions. They are leaders of community organizations and volunteer groups, and they encourage their peers to be equally involved. Their concerns stem from the discontent they feel with the political process and the perception that they lack the necessary influence on government policy. This is rapidly changing as young Arabs emerged into the sphere of politics through social media and grassroots campaigns. They are immersing themselves in civil society and affecting a reform movement from the bottom up. Their most pressing demands are those for more democratic freedom in economic, political, and social fields. Political and economic reforms are interdependent and serve to make democratic practice a part of the solution. We cannot affect political reforms without a free market economy. Otherwise, political economic opportunities will remain limited. On the social front, young Arabs are not receptive to traditional Western ideas of freedom of religion, non-discrimination, and the equality of the sexes. On the contrary, this generation is more accepting of differences, as young women are emerging as leaders within their communities. Nonetheless, women are still disappointingly underrepresented in government and business, and their disempowerment is another hurdle we must overcome. And let me just talk very briefly about the efforts of a country that I come from. We in Kuwait foresaw several years ago the discontent felt by the average Arab. And for that reason, Kuwait proposed the idea of holding an Arab economic summit biannually to address the social, economic, and development concerns and obstacles facing our people. Education, housing, infrastructure, and healthcare were the forefront topics for such a summit. And Kuwait successfully held the first summit in 2009. One of the main initiatives put forth by Kuwait was the establishment of a $2 billion fund, specifically aimed at financing medium and small businesses in the Arab world. It is this kind of initiatives that impact the everyday Arab citizen, providing those with a viable idea the sufficient and necessary capital to fulfill it. We recognized that it is our duty to encourage innovation and entrepreneurship, as both hold the key to future progress. The Quaid Fund for Arab Economic Development, the first of its kind in the developing world, played a major role in providing development assistance throughout the world. Established in 1961, the fund has allocated assistance worth more than $15 billion to more than 100 countries around the world. And this aid is specifically aimed at development projects in order to help societies prosper. Our target is not to give handouts, but rather to teach people how to fish. I'm proud to say we have helped educate the young, eradicate disease, fight hunger, provide shelter, and build essential infrastructure for millions in the region and around the world. And more recently, about just 2 months ago at the United Nations General Assembly, 193 world leaders adopted the global goals for sustainable development to achieve basically 3 things in the next 15 years: end extreme poverty, fight inequality and injustice, and confront the climate change challenge. Kuwait made a pledge to provide $15 billion to developing countries to achieve these sustainable development goals. Furthermore, in response to the mounting and intense humanitarian crisis in Syria, Kuwait hosted 3 international donors conferences in Kuwait and contributed almost $2 billion to the United Nations Relief Fund for Syria. We are looking forward for the Emir of Kuwait to co-chair with the Prime Minister Cameron the 4th International Donors Conference for Syria, scheduled to take place here in London next year. Finally, I will leave you with a few words to reflect upon by the Arab poet laureate Khalil Gibran. And I quote, "Youth is a beautiful dream on whose brightness books shed a blinding dust. Youth's joyous purpose cannot be fulfilled until that day comes. Too slow is our march towards spiritual elevation because we make so little use of youth's ardor. So let us not neglect the passion and commitment of our youth, and let us not ignore the link of knowledge to their dreams." Thank you very much indeed.